Let's start our program tonight, and this is the next in our series of From Our Foreign Correspondent. And tonight we are traveling very far across the globe, all the way to South America, the west coast of South America, beautiful country called Peru, one that I have not had the pleasure of visiting, but we have with us tonight two special guests. One is Jack Falkon, who you'll see here on the screen. We'll see him enlarge in just a moment. Jack is a businessman. He's a member of the Peru Jewish Association. Forgive me if I put that in English and not in Spanish. That's the equivalent, by the way, of our Board of Deputies. And Jack has responsibility for relations with the government and with the press. And he is also the chairman of the Sephardi community. Here's our one guest. The second guest is 90-year-old Efraín Goldenberg, who happens to be the father of our member, Ida Schneider. He's not only one of the oldest members of the Jewish community in Peru, but he's without any doubt the most famous. Let me tell you about my conversation with Efraín. He was due to come into our program, but it was difficult for him to do so because of some of the technical issues relating to Zoom. So he and I had a wonderful conversation last night. And during the course of our program tonight, as I speak to Jack, we're going to intersperse some of the conversation with clips taken from my conversation with Efraín live last night. So we'll see the two of them together. But we're going to start with Jack. And Jack, I know that you were born in Peru, but in terms of your background, I guess you're absolutely the epitome of the wandering Jew. So just tell us a bit about your parents and your upbringing and your education and what you do in the first instance in your business life before we come to some of the community stuff. So over to you, Jack.
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi. First of all, let me, a small correction, I'm not the chairman of the Sephardi community, I'm the vice chairman, which is,
right.
Well, my salary is not as high as the chairman, so, okay, I was born in Peru. I'm the first generation. My father was born in Egypt, and his parents were born in Turkey. My mother was born in France, and her parents were born in Bulgaria. Now, so that's the epitome of the wandering Jew. My father left Egypt after the, when he went to study in the university in France. The situation for the Jewish community in Egypt was already worsening. So when he finished his studies, he left France and he came to South America, first to Argentina, where he met my mother, and then they came together to Peru. Now my mother, her parents were born in Bulgaria. They were living in France, where my grandfather was managing an office for a Swiss company in France. And that's where the war that's when the war started, and they spent the whole war hiding. And when the war finished, my grandfather said, okay, enough of Europe, let's go to somewhere else. And that's how the Swiss company sent him to Argentina. There they met my father, and they came finally to Peru, where some members of both families from my father's family was already living in Peru. So I was born here. I studied in the Jewish school here in Peru. I finished my studies. I started the university here in Peru. I did 2 years, and then I transferred to the Technion in Israel. So I graduated in the Technion. I am an industrial engineer. I worked in Israel for a year, and then I went to the US. I did my MBA in Cornell University. That was a long time ago. And then I came to Peru, and I came back to Peru, and I started to work in the family business. I am right now the CEO of a plastics company in Peru. We have different divisions. We have a packaging division, a consumer goods division where we make back to school and office supplies. We manufacture play balls, and we also have a technological division where we do automatic data capture and automation. So that's what I do for a living, but I spend most of my time, no, that's not true, but I spend a lot of time working for the community. You know, the pay is very high, so that allows me to
So just, Jack, sketch for us the Peru Jewish community and the institutions, the organizations, the synagogues, the schools, etc. Give us a cook's tour of Jewish community in Peru, which I think is predominantly in Lima, isn't it?
I would say that 95% of the members are in Lima. It wasn't that way some time ago. I mean, because when Jews first arrived to Peru, they started to work as salespeople. I mean, traveling all around. So you had quite a few families living in the interior, in the provinces. Now, in the last years, I mean, I would say 95% of the community lives in Peru. This is, I mean, we have something like 2,400 members. We used to be 5,000 strong, but since the 70s, where we had a coup d'etat, and then because of the terrorist movement during the 80s and 90s, early 90s, I would say that half the community left. They left for, at the very beginning, they left for Venezuela in the 70s. A few of them left for the US. And in the last years, quite a few have left for Israel. So out of those members, we have three different communities. We have the Ashkenazi community, which is the largest one. We have the Sephardic community, and we have a conservative community, which was based on the original German immigrants that got to Peru at the end of the 1980s. We have a very important school where we have 11 years of studies. It's considered one of the best schools in Lima. I assume that about 80 to 85% of the kids, of the Jewish kids, go to school. We also have a Beit Chabad, which is active. We have a very nice and quite a brand new home for the elderly. We just moved it, we built it. It's really amazing. And we have, of course, all the different institutions to help the needy. We have all the Vitsos and the Eshet Hailes and well, I guess what every Jewish community has in the world.
Right. So I presume that Chabad will be dealing in the main with the fringe people, with probably some of the visitors from Israel for Pesach and Sidorim, etc., whereas the other communities will be more mainstream. Is that the way it works? That's where it often works in other countries.
That's right. That's the way it works here in Peru as well.
Right. And you actually, I think they run a very, I think you told me that they run one of the largest Sidorim in the world for 1,500 people or something like that.
Yes, they are always, I mean, comparing themselves with Kathmandu. I think that's the largest ceder in the world. But Beit Chabad, they organized 13 sedarim in Peru. That was last year. So it's amazing.
Jack, I read somewhere that there are a couple of other smaller communities in Peru, and I wonder if you know anything about them. One group is called the B'nai Moshe, who are converts from Christianity. And they're called the Inca Jews, apparently. And the other group is about a small group of descendants from Moroccan Jews who live somewhere in one of the Amazon jungle ports or something. So can you just tell us a bit about these two little fringe communities, if you know anything about them?
Okay, I don't know about the B'nai Moshe. Never heard of them. I know there is they call themselves a small Jewish community in Huánuco, or I'm not sure if it's Huánuco or Huancayo, which are two different places, but those are like 5 or 10 families. They have no contact whatsoever with the Jewish community. And I mean, the ones who are living in the jungle, they live in Iquitos. Iquitos was one of the centers where you had a Jewish community. You still have a Jewish cemetery, okay? And they claim to be the descendants of those Jews. And they are quite active. I mean, I haven't been there, I haven't visited them, but I know the Israeli ambassador has been there quite a few times. And you also had a large community of converts in Cajamarca, and quite a few of them had made Aliyah. And I think
that's the group who are called B'nai Moshe. Yes.
Okay, so those are the B'nai Moshe. I didn't know they claimed themselves, they call themselves the Inca Jews, because I mean, I know that originally they were, they were Catholics. They went to the evangelist church, and then they decided to move to Judaism.
Right, right. Okay, so you mentioned in this very brief introduction that a lot of the Jews used to live in other parts of Peru. We're going to go now for our first clip with Efraín Goldenberg, and he's going to tell us a bit about his parents and how they arrived in Peru and his early days. So hopefully this will work, the technology, and we're leaving it to Rabbi Eli behind the scenes to try and make it work. And my other son, Levi, has been working on this all day to try and produce it for us. Is this working for you, El? Efraín, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Hang on a second, Ellie, we've got something in the front of the screen which you have to try and remove. This is technically challenging, folks, but no doubt we'll sort it out. Efraín, how are you?
Fine, thank you. We have quarantine since March, and for people my age is until July 31. And
goodness me. So are you not allowed to go out at all?
At all, but I have decided that I will not go out even after that, because I am very vulnerable. I have a pacemaker, a heart condition, asthma, high blood pressure.
And in other words, you're a completely healthy man.
Yes, and I'm 90 years young.
90 years young, Kenan Hora. Admeir Esrim. For a person who's led such an active life, it must be very frustrating for you not to be able to go out and do the things that you like to do.
Fortunately, this little phone gives me the chance to be in contact with all my children and grandchildren every day.
Well, thank goodness for technology.
I feel that's right.
Efraín, take me back to where the time that you were born, around about 1929 or somewhere around there. So your parents came to Peru. Why did they emigrate to Peru? I mean, Peru of all places.
My father, because condition economically for the family over there changed after the First War.
But why did they choose Peru? What did Peru have to offer compared to the rest of the world?
Peru was the gold of Peru. Peru was very famous in those years because of the history of gold.
I see, all about gold. How large was the Jewish population in Peru in those early years when you were being brought up until your bar mitzvah?
I was born in December 1929. The community was between 3,000 and maximum in the highest moment, maybe 5,000 people. I don't think ever more than that. mostly Ashkenazi, mostly from Romania and Russia, a few Litvaks.
And there was Sephardim as well, weren't there?
Polish also, Polish. And the Sephardim came before. The Sephardim, when my father came here and his brothers came here, there was already a Sephardic community that came 10 or 20 years before. So they had already made some money. They were more prosperous in those days than the Ashkenazi. I was born in 1929, and I brought with me the big rush of the market everywhere.
Right, right.
There was an economic crisis in Peru also. And after 2 or 3 years, my father, with my mother, had to start all over again.
So times were very hard, and it was a typical immigrant story. Well, there you are. Okay, that's our first clip, and Efraín went on to tell me that his father lived in a little small town somewhere on the coast. His father was a peddler, and they had a very hard time until eventually he struck it lucky, because it turned out that in the Second World War, this town became hugely important because there was an oil refinery, and the Americans were very interested in maintaining this, keeping this out of the hands of the Japanese. So it was flooded with American servicemen who suddenly wanted to buy all of the goods that Efraín had available to sell. So that was the beginning, or his father rather. So that was the beginning of the prosperity of the family at that time. Okay, we'll come back to Efraín in a moment for some other things. But Jack, I want to come back to you for the moment because you mentioned some of the issues which were happening in the 80s and the 90s. Peru was a pretty violent place in those early years, as I understand it. There had been years of military rule and hyperinflation and a collapsing economy. There were terrorist attacks between very powerful terrorist groups, the Sendero Luminoso and the Tupac Amaru. So tell us what it was like growing up as a teenager, I think probably at that stage, in that kind of Peru at that point in time.
Well, when I was growing up, this was during the military rule, and I cannot say that we had violence on those years. I mean, there was it was a normal country in the sense that I wouldn't say that there was more violence than any other place. Now, the violence really started in the year 1980 when Sendero came out as a terrorist movement. That was their first action was during the elections in 1980. From 1980 on to the 1990s, when Abimael Guzman, the leader, was caught, this was a horrible country. Now, I left Peru when this was on 1984 or 85. So the tension was already very high, but it got much worse after that. Now, we leave that in the family because my father was kidnapped by the MRTA, which is one of the terrorist movements, and he was kidnapped for over a month. So it was a very hard time. I was studying in Israel during that time, and well, you just can imagine. Now, although the Sendero was, I cannot say that it was terminated because they are still active, but in a much lower scale. More than a terrorist movement right now, they have this symbiotic relationship with the drug dealers. So they provide protection, and the drug dealers provide money. So in the interior of Peru, especially in the jungle, where we have a lot of coca growers, it is a violent place. And of course, the city is still, I mean, Lima is still considered not everywhere, but there are some places, like in every large city, there are some places where you have to take care.
Right. So this was a pretty violent time, and then something extraordinary happened from the story in regard to the story of the Jews, because in 1990, Alberto Fujimori, who was the son of a Japanese immigrant becomes the president, and he is told by a friend that there is a very talented and successful businessman who is in the import-export business and who is involved in fisheries, and he travels to the world and he's got very good connections with lots of people in the world, and it's suggested to the president of Peru that this person would actually be quite good as a foreign minister. So we're going to have another clip over here to find out what happens before we come back to you again, Jack. Ellie, would you like to play us the next clip? I want to fast forward a little bit and take us into your later years, sometime probably in your 40s or 50s, whereby now you are doing very well. You have an import-export business and you're very much involved in fisheries. Suddenly people begin to take notice of you. And the president at that time decides that Mr. Fujimori, decides that he wants to bring you into the government, and because you are trading with other countries, you are traveling all over the world, you are an internationalist, you speak the language, and he needs to have a foreign minister. So the president of Lima invites you to become part of his government.
Actually, the president didn't know me, didn't know probably of my existence, but a good friend of mine who was close to him and working with him mentioned my name and suggested that I should be foreign minister. In those days, I am a lawyer by profession, but I never practiced law. I did not want to go into my father's business that in those days were speaking of the early 90s. My father had in the 50s a jewelry shop in Lima. He became a jeweler in the small town, and when he moved to Lima, he opened up a jewelry store in downtown Lima. When I got married at 22 years of age, I was in last year of law school, and I did not want to go into my father's business, but I didn't want to practice law either. I wanted to be a businessman. In those days, the Jewish community had 3 levels of businessmen. The lower class were the merchants. The middle class, when I say class, I mean not aristocracy, but economic level.
Yes.
The middle class were the importers or wholesalers.
Right.
And the rich ones were the manufacturers. The rich ones had already textile factories, mainly textile, but I didn't like the smotter business. I didn't like the smotters, and I decided I want to go in business. So my father helped me to start the business of import. And that way, that took me to the Far East.
Yes.
Frequently, and I was prosperous with my business.
So the president gets to hear about you. He brings you into the government. You are the first Jew in the history of Peru who actually comes into government.
Correct. The first ministers here are appointed. No, you don't have to be a member of parliament to be a minister.
The president just appoints you as a minister.
Like in the USA, the same thing. So I was made first Minister of Foreign Affairs, and
then if I can just interrupt you for a moment, Efraín. So then we have a rather extraordinary situation in which 11 soldiers are accused of murder, and there is a great big debate about whether they should be tried by the military or whether they should be tried by a civilian court. And the Prime Minister, Alfonso Bustamante, decides to resign over the matter because he does not like what the president is doing. And the president, half of the cabinet, then the majority of the president's cabinet, all resign. And he persuades some of them to remain. And he looks around and he realizes that his foreign minister is actually a very bright man. And why should he remain a foreign minister? Let's make him prime minister. So he invites you, he appoints you as the Prime Minister of Peru. How did you feel about that?
Prime Minister and Foreign Minister also.
At the same time. Yeah.
Both. Alfonso Bustamante, who had resigned, he's a very good friend of mine. Actually, he was Prime Minister at the same time as I was Foreign Affairs Minister, and we became very friendly. As a matter of fact, we are still friends, and I am a small partner in a business that he is the chairman of.
So tell us the story about what happens when you are going to be brought into office and you have to kneel down in front of a cross, because that's the way it's done in a Catholic country. So what happens then?
Not everybody kneels, but the cross is always there. When I was going to swear for the first time as the foreign minister, I asked the people of protocol before that I let them know that I cannot swear with the cross. Don't worry, we'll take it out. And it was, my nomination was a very big secret. Nobody knew anything about that. Suddenly, I told them maybe I should swear in at the last, and then
at the end, at the last one.
That was my idea, but I was very ignorant. They explained me that according to the protocol, every minister swears in an order pre-established. And the foreign minister is the first one to swear after the prime minister.
Right.
Always. So the cross was there for the swearing of the prime minister, and they took it out to the next room.
They removed it so that you could swear without on a chumash, on a Bible.
On the Bible, and they took it down. The people around there didn't know what was happening. The TV people, the camera, what is going on? It's the first time in the history that cross is taken out. After I was appointed, the cross came back.
Oh, there you go. What a fantastic story. Really, really remarkable. Jack, you were in Peru at the time. Do you remember this?
No, I was not in Peru. I was living in Israel and then in the US. But I know the story perfectly. I know the story perfectly.
Is there anything you wanted to add to it?
No, it was quite amazing. I mean, for us, I mean, it was unbelievable that a Jew would be prime minister. It was unbelievable. First of all, that was a foreign affairs minister and then prime minister. It was unbelievable.
Yes. And then, of course, Efraín came back again at a later stage. He was, I'm not sure whether it's in our clip or not. I can't remember what we kept in and what we edited out. But a little later on, after he'd left office, Fujimoto begged him. He actually had left Efraín had left the country, gone to live in America, so that he wouldn't be press ganged back into government again. And he was pulled back in order to become finance minister. So here's a man, a Jew, who was the very first Jew in parliament in Peru, foreign minister, prime minister, and a minister of finance, which is absolutely remarkable. So Efraín told me that in his opinion, President Fujimori, who came in on the back of these circumstances you described with hyperinflation and terrorists, etc., but he did two amazingly good things. He managed to quell the violence and he managed to get inflation under control. What is the current landscape of political landscape of Peru today? Do you see this today? Do you see Peru as a stable country now?
No, it's definitely not stable. I mean, proof of that is that we had a change of president a year and a half ago, and then we had to call for elections for a new parliament. So it's not very stable. Yes, we are a democratic country. We respect democratic rule, but no, stable, no. We cannot say that Peru is a stable country. It's a democratic country, but there is this infighting between the different parts of the state. I mean, the executive, the legislative branch, even the judiciary. And the problem, one of the problems, we have many problems in Peru, is that we don't have strong political parties. So for every election, you will have new political parties, newcomers. For example, in this last Congress, we have like 6 or 7 members of this party called the FREPAP, which they dressed as the old Israelites dressed in the desert. And you really don't understand where do they come from, what do they do, although it's a very old sect or I don't know, it's religion. I mean, it's amazing that they have 6 or 7 seats in parliament. And every time we have elections, we have newcomers coming in and they come with all these weird projects and laws. So to say that Peru is a stable country, no, I wouldn't say that.
So how does that impact upon the Jewish community?
I wouldn't say that it has an impact on the Jewish community. It has an impact on the community at large. I mean, doing business in Peru, although it's a capitalist country and I mean, there is free trade. We have free trade agreements with the European Union, with the US, with China, even with India. We are negotiating a free trade agreement. I mean, there is something that we do not have in Peru, and that's rule of law. So that's the most difficult part of doing business in Peru. Okay, there is no rule of law.
And how would that express itself? And for example, you just don't have access to justice.
You have access to justice, but you have to take that into account. I mean, things here are very unstable. Now, the least that I want to do is to discourage you to invest in Peru. So please come and invest in Peru, okay? So I want, but I have to tell you the truth. So doing business in Peru is an adventure, okay? We have very successful business people. We have a lot of entrepreneurs. The Peruvian is an entrepreneur. We have 75% of the population is not in the formal economy. It's in the informal economy, okay? And most of them are small entrepreneurs, peddlers, okay? Small businessmen that they have this family business. And Peruvians are super entrepreneurial, but we have to confront this hyper-regulated state, okay, where everything is regulated, but nobody is enforcing regulation. So you only enforce regulation on formal businesses. So we have this huge contradiction in our economy.
Well, let me just touch on, I suppose, a fairly delicate subject, because it fits in with the way in which you've described Peru and the absence of rule of law. I know that there have been a number of very, very difficult situations for the Jewish population in terms of Jews who have stepped outside the boundaries and have brought great discredit to themselves and to the community. You know, there have been a few scandals, and I know that one of them was a very famous one in 2000 when there were major shareholders, Jewish shareholders of a couple of banks, and that the banks were about to collapse, and nevertheless these Jews continued to encourage, knowing that the bank was going to collapse, they encouraged Jewish investors, treasurers of Jewish charities to deposit their funds in these banks. Thousands of investors lost all of their funds. It was a terrible, terrible scandal. The rabbis actually banned these individuals from synagogues and from Jewish ceremonies. And I know that at the time, in 2000, it was well documented in all the newspapers, and it was a terrible scandal. There have been others as well. I know that the wife of one of the prime ministers, who was Jewish, Eliane Karp, was accused of inappropriately spending government money on private holidays, and she fled to Israel. There was the issue of the Wolf-Fencer brothers, who were taking large sums of money for printing articles in tabloids directly at the instruction of President Fujimori. So you've had a few rogues in the community, amongst the Jewish community, amongst Jews in the community, and it hasn't always left the Jewish community smelling of roses. It's had an impact upon the way in which the Jewish community is perceived by the wider community in Peru. Do you see any residual effect of these sorts of scandals in the way in which Jews are treated, or Jewish business people are treated or looked at in Peru today?
Well, the first thing I want to tell you is that you have done your homework. I mean, you have done your homework. Now, the second thing is, let me correct you in one. I mean, Eliane Karp was not the wife of a minister. She was the wife of the president.
President, I see. Right, okay.
Of the president,
yes.
Okay. And now they are in the U.S. and he was in jail, and he's now under house arrest. So they are in a complicated situation. I think that what you are showing us in that small summary of events is that Jews are not better or worse than the rest of the population. Okay, and whenever I read an article in the newspapers about something that is, I mean, a criminal, and they add the word Jew, okay, I send my letter saying that you never specify the religion of a criminal when it's Catholic or evangelist or whatever. You cannot only put that adjective of Jew to a criminal when we are talking about Jews, okay? I can tell you that after quite a few years, the newspapers, they take care of not doing that mistake because they will get my letter, okay, and they will publish it.
And this, of course, is part of your role in the association.
That's part of my role. That's part of my role. So yes, we have criminals, okay, like everybody else. So please don't call them Jews as you don't call them Catholics, okay?
Right.
Now, if this has affected or not the Jewish community, I'm not sure, because I mean, you will always read a few things, a few anti-Semitic opinions, especially in the social networks. Okay, that's where you read that. You won't read that in the newspapers. You won't see that on TV. Of course, whenever there is something going on in Gaza or in Lebanon, okay, you will start feeling the heat. Okay. But they are more careful nowadays, and they will direct that anti-Semitism under this guise of anti-Israel, okay? And I'm not saying that you cannot criticize Israel for some of its policies, okay? But they will take care of not mentioning the J word, okay? If there is anti-Semitism in Peru, yes, of course, like in everywhere else, okay? I cannot say that this is a big issue. This is not Argentina, where you had 500,000 Jews and you will see Jews everywhere. Okay, so we are a very small community. Okay, sometimes we're high profile, but I wouldn't say that anti-Semitism is a feature of Peru. No.
In regard to high profile, although Efraín was the first Jew in parliament. Subsequently, there have been a number of others as well. And as I understand it, Jews have actually, in the economy and the running of the country and in politics, have played a role which is disproportionate to their numbers. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, of course it's disproportionate because we are only 2,500. So if you have 4 or 5 people, it's disproportionate. But right. I wouldn't say that we have a large amount of Jews taking part in politics. Okay, which that's not the case. Okay, we had a vice president, David Weissman, who was vice president for President Toledo, and I can still remember one morning where we had a David Harris from the American Jewish Committee visiting us, okay? And President Toledo was somewhere overseas. And that morning we were having breakfast in the government palace, and it was David Harris, the 3 presidents of the Jewish community, myself, okay, and Vice President David Weissman. So everybody was a Jew in the table. It was unbelievable.
Wonderful.
That was unbelievable.
Let's just turn for a moment to the issue of COVID, because of course Efraín mentioned that he's not going out even after even after July when he's allowed to. The numbers don't look great at the moment. As of Sunday, when I looked it up, Peru had 275,589 recorded cases of coronavirus, which ranked Peru as the 7th country in the world by recorded cases. And you had 9,135 recorded deaths, which ranked you 11th in the world. Are you guys getting on top of this?
Okay, first of all, you know
and
how...
By the way, just to mention to our audience that when we had a quick chat yesterday to meet each other, or the day before yesterday, you were driving in your car wearing a mask. And I said to you, but you're driving alone in your car, your windows are closed, why are you wearing a mask? And you said, quite simply, because you'd be arrested if you didn't. So, so it sounds like you have a problem.
Well, I told you before, we are a hyper-regulated country. So unbelievably, if you are not wearing a mask inside your car, you will be fined. Okay, so it's ridiculous, but that's the way it is. Now, first of all, you know how dead people are counted under the COVID rules. I mean, they are only counting those that have been tested positive for COVID, and they are recorded as death. So yes, we're counting something like 9,000 people. The truth is, if you see the graphs, and everybody's looking at those graphs, the difference between the dead people, okay, in June and April, compared with dead people previous year, I think that the real number is closer to 22 or 23,000 people. Okay, so that's the real number of dead people in Peru. Okay. Okay, now we have been under a very strict lockdown since the very beginning. So what happens? What went wrong? Okay, the thing is that Peru, as I was telling you during our conversation, is a poor country. Okay, in Lima, over 40% of the population doesn't have a refrigerator at home. Goodness. Therefore, you have to go out to buy food. Okay, you cannot stay home. Now, as I was telling again before, 75% of the people live out of the informal economy, and quite a few of them, they have to go out every day to make a living. If you stay home, you will die from hunger. If you go out, you can die from coronavirus. So you have to choose. At the same time, okay, I think that the government, they make quite a lot of efforts. I mean, this is not a government that has underplayed the virus as Mr. Trump has done in the US. I mean, we have taken this very seriously. There have been quite a few mistakes. Okay, for example, the government only realized that one of the main places for contagious was the wholesale markets, where everybody goes to buy food, okay, in large quantities. Also, transport is a large problem in the city. I think that it's 25 or 30% of the population, they don't have access to running water in their houses. So how are you gonna wash your hands? Mm-hmm. So yes, and at the same time, the public health is a big issue in Peru. When this crisis started, we had 500 ICU beds in Peru with respirators. 250 beds. Nowadays, we have increased that to 1,300, I believe. But just imagine, less than 300 beds with a respirator. Yeah. Yeah. And if you compare that to all the other countries in South America, we are in the bottom of the table in terms of being ready to something like this. Right. So even with
you've explained it very, very well indeed, and thank you for that explanation. I'm going to play one more clip from Efraín, and then we're going to come back to you because I have some other questions. So back now to Efraín for some other questions that I asked him and the last part of our interview together. During the couple of years that you were Prime Minister, you had a war with Ecuador. What was it like during that time? Did you enjoy being Prime Minister?
I will tell you. According to law here, when the Prime Minister resigns or is changed, the whole cabinet goes out, can be reappointed. Usually many are reappointed, sometimes all of them, but the Prime Minister. So the cabinets are known as the Cabinet Bustamante, that was. And then when I became Prime Minister, was the Goldenberg cabinet. If I resign, everybody is automatically out of a job.
But you did resign. You did resign, didn't you?
I did not. I was Prime Minister until the last day of Fujimori's first term. I went out together with him. He came back next day. next day because he won the election for the second term.
But you were no longer prime minister, but they made you finance minister then.
In the last 9 months of his second term, I did not want to. I said no many times. I went to the States with my wife, and I told him no. And he insisted. And out of loyalty, I was not interested. Conditions were very difficult economically and politically, and I did not want to. I went out the first time through the big door. I didn't want to be involved again, but out of loyalty, he pressed me in such a way that out of loyalty, I decided to accept.
Did you enjoy those years, Efraín?
The second time, not as much as the first. In the meantime, my father had passed away at 97.
And so your father lived to see you become Prime Minister of Peru.
That was worth the whole thing. My father, who came at 22 years of age to this country, that started like a peddler. He was at the palace, at the presidential palace, when I became Minister of Foreign Relations, and Prime Minister. He was there chatting with the president. He is what that made worldwide everything for me.
Was your mother alive as well?
No.
So you were an only child, your wife was an only child. Between the two of you, you've had 5 children. 3 of them continue to live in Peru. Your son now runs the business that you started. You've been involved in fisheries. You've been involved in the economy of the country. Do you have continued faith in the Jewish community of Peru, given the fact that it has shrunken significantly in size over the course of the years that you've been living in Peru? Do you have faith for its future?
Yes. Now, with the pandemic, conditions are different, are difficult. But I still have a future. There is a future for them. Some of my grandchildren are there here, but I have one granddaughter that is in Israel studying, and she wants to stay there.
Efraín, if one of your grandchildren now asked you, Grandpa, I'm not quite sure what they call you, but let's say Grandpa, should I remain living here in Peru, or should I rather go and live abroad in Israel or in America or in England, in other countries? What was going to be your advice?
It's very, it varies from case to case, depending on what you want to. Some of my grandchildren are better off here, and they are a very complicated question, because I would say you have a future here, but you can make your future anywhere. you have an education and a temperament that you can be successful everywhere. Whatever makes you happy.
Wise words. And Efraín, I'm afraid that with that very sound advice, I'm afraid we're going to have to end our conversation now, and I look forward to another opportunity. So can I say to you a very, very big thank you. We wish you well, wish you continued good health and sound mind.
Thank you, Shlomo.
Classic. Jack, I'm going to ask you the same question. The community has shrunk enormously. You are facing huge threats from two fronts. One from assimilation, which is, like in many other countries, attacking the Jewish community. The other is the fact that young people want to live in other countries, in Israel or in America or wherever else. So the community has shrunk from its number of maximum 5,500 that Efraín had mentioned earlier on to the 2,000 to 2,500 now. Do you see a future for the Jewish community of Peru?
I'll tell you, I have my eldest son is studying in Israel. My daughter is studying in Spain, and the youngest one is still in high school, okay? I think that my duty is to make this community a viable community, so if they decide to come back, that they can, okay? So I cannot say that this community has or doesn't have a future. It won't depend only on me, but my job is to make this possible. Now, if they decide to come back, that they can find a community so they can live here as Jews.
So I see that there must be something in the air in Peru that produces wisdom, because Efraín gave a very wise answer, and so did you. Actually, we've had a wonderful conversation, and you've really said, given us a huge insight and a very articulate one. And the fact that your English is so excellent has been an absolute pleasure. So Jack, I want to say thank you to you. But before we end, I want to bring in one other person to this conversation over here. And I wanted to turn to a lady who's been sitting very patiently for the last hour, watching her father in those clips. Edith, I'm going to turn to you. You must be enormously, enormously proud of your father.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I think that I have the best dad in the world, you know, so, and we all love him, and he has been the rock of my family and a fantastic role model, not only for me, but for my children and, you know, my brothers and sisters. And it's a privilege to be part of his family. That's how I believe.
And listening to Jack so eloquently explaining the quality and the nature of the community and the quality of life, do you feel that now that you and Jack and your family, your Jack and family have settled in England, do you feel in any sense a tug or a pull for the country of your birth?
Unfortunately, no. The pull that I get is because my family is there, and I feel Peruvian myself. But London, I'm not saying England, but London is a very welcoming city that I ended up to love. I love living here, and my kids were brought up here, most probably will stay in Europe. I don't know, maybe they will go back to Peru as well, you know, we don't know. If one of them moves to Peru, believe me, I'll be the first one to go back.
I mean, if the kids decide to go back to Peru, Jack Falkon is going to make sure that there is a strong Jewish community.
Oh, thank you, Edith. And thank you, Edith, very much for introducing me to this Jack over here, with whom we've had such a marvelous conversation, and for facilitating the ability to be able to speak to your dad. It took a bit of time to reel him in, because he was a bit conscious about his speech and about his age, but it's been an absolute privilege and really wonderful to be able to speak to him. And I hope that those who've been watching tonight have enjoyed it as much as I have. Also want to say thank you to my son Levi for editing those tapes under pressure today, since the interview was last night with Efraín, and also to Rabbi Eli, who has been running the show behind the scenes over here, and always facilitating these programs. So, Jack, we're coming back to you now. Last word. What would you like to say to us here in England from Peru by way of farewell and words of chizuk and strength?
Well, first of all,
excuse me, Jack. I'm looking for some really good, strong Sephardi words.
Okay. First of all, I hope to see you very soon visiting Peru. Okay, that's the first thing. Okay, so I hope that commercial flights will restart soon. Otherwise, I won't be able to see my son for a long time, and I won't be able to see you coming to Peru, or Jackie and Edith coming to visit Efraín and Irene. But please come visit. Tell us in advance so we can really host you. This is a wonderful country. Okay, it's really a wonderful country. I think that even though we have a small community, it's a beautiful community. Let us, if you are interested, let us show you our school, our Beit Avot, our synagogues, okay, and really the soul of the community. We have a wonderful museum. We have a wonderful youth movement. So yes, we are small, but we're strong.
Small but perfectly formed. Thank you so much. Really lovely to see you, lovely to meet you. And thank you to all of our audience tonight for having spent this last hour with us and staying with us throughout the program. It's been really hugely informative, and look forward to other happy occasions when we should meet again. Thank you all and a very good night.